Hi, you guys. Welcome back. This is Richard Sachs. This is Lost Arts Radio, and it's one of our shows with inspiring guests to give you ideas of what's possible in your life in all kinds of different situations. And remember, if you've been watching the recent archives, at least a few months ago, we had a show on bees, and there was a lot of interest in that. All the comments I got were really extremely positive. It was a very inspiring show with Jacqueline Freeman. You can see that archive anytime you want to. It's there for free on lostartsradio.com or Blog Talk or any of the other platforms. You can't tell that anybody cared about it because we're totally shadow banned, but there's a lot more views than you can see counted there, and it was a great show. So I wanted to do more, partly because I'm always studying nature myself, and my feeling is from observing that there's consciousness everywhere to a much greater degree than we're led to believe. And the more you get in touch with that and start decoding it and see what's really going on, it gives you insight into understanding yourself, which is really critical for everything in your life. So I was looking for somebody who could talk to us more about bees, but not from a conventional point of view where, okay, this is the honey machine, and you put the bee in this square container and you give them enough to survive and you take everything else out that you can. And, if you can save money by feeding them sugar, that's great too. It's just a question of percentage of profit. And we want to come from a completely different place where taking the honey is not even an issue. It's not the point. It's understanding what you can learn from the bees. And there's not a lot of people running around these days that look at it that way. So we found one with Jacqueline's help, and this is Susan Knilans, and she's the author of a book called Animals as Teachers and Healers. I think that's
Animals
correct.
As Teachers and Healers, Animals as Guides for the Soul.
Right.
Heart, Wildlife.
And that's exactly what we want to get into. So maybe a good place to start would be how you got to this point. You must have started sometime before when you were not even looking at these things, and what changed your perspective and got you to really look deeper into what we're told about things in nature and start to learn all this, and then we'll step up to the present and see what's going on now.
Sure, thank you. Actually, I think I came down the birth canal with it. I think I came down with a frog in one hand and a puppy in the other.
Wow, okay, so it's been a while.
I was born in New York City, Queens, and lived in an apartment, and the only nature I could find was outside. There was one small tree, and it had the little square that you plant a tree in, so the square was dirt.
Right.
And I just sit there under that tree and play with the dirt. Wow. And was just mesmerized by it.
That was the closest forest you could access.
That was the forest, the one tree and a little bit of dirt. And as I grew up, I was always, carrying in something. Here's a cat, here's a bird, and my parents pretty much fed that. They were good with that. So when I'd bring home foundlings and try to fix them, repair them, release them, they were really supportive. And I was a shy child. I stuttered. I lisped. The lisp is gone, but I still occasionally stutter. Mm. And animals just seem so much more welcoming. Kids can be kind of brutal.
So I noticed the same thing, yeah.
Animals were a safe place. And when I wrote years later, Animals as Teachers and Healers, a lot of the letters I got from people talking about how animals had filled that role for them. It was a sense of safety, like in difficult family times. Yeah. And so I always saw them as a sense of safety. And I guess because they almost, my love for them almost parented me. And because of that, I just became respectful and enchanted, and never saw them as beings to be exploited. And even when I was young, I found zoos troubling places. Why do we keep them prisoners? Rodeos made me sad. So I was pretty much always like that. But in my earlier years, that was looked at as being quite flaky. Oh, Susan's friends are all off becoming lawyers and physicists, and Susan's working for a horse trainer cleaning stalls, or working at a humane society or a wildlife rehab center. And people thought that I was quite flaky.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny, once I wrote my first book, it's like all those experiences fed it. And people honestly believed that that had been a plan all along, that I was going to work with animals, learn about them, and then write about them. No.
Well, was that book prior to the one that I mentioned, that Animals as Teachers and Healers?
No, Animals as Teachers and Healers was the first. And it was actually a New York Times bestseller, because at the time, people weren't talking about the depth of their relationship with animals. There were books out about dog training and beautiful animals and cats. But in terms of the deep relational, meaningful encounter people had with animals in their backyards or with their pets, that wasn't being talked about. That was really laughed at. Mm-hmm. So I kind of gave a voice and some shelf space in a bookstore to that notion that these relations can be life transforming and life saving.
What year was that book written, Animals as Teachers?
1996.
Okay, and I assume it's easy to find, right? Amazon and everything.
Oh, yeah. Amazon's everything.
Okay, but I mean, it's easy to buy at this point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. They're all still, I think all of them are still in publication, but Heart in the Wild, I bought the rights back to that.
Okay. Why don't you mention the other books, the titles of the other books, so people can look?
Well, when the first book did well, of course, my agent wanted other books. So my second book was Animals as Guides for the Soul. And it just went deeper into the process of if you believe that animals are teachers and healers, then how do you start to bring that awareness into different areas of your life? So that was the kind of discussion there. And then I moved up to the Rocky Mountains, and I forget what the next book was that I was supposed to write, but the day I sat down to write it, my house burned to the ground. Wow. So then it was like, called up the agent, and I said, everything is on delay because I've got to find a place to live and deal with all this. Yeah. And when I came out the other end, I called her up and I said, I want to write about what nature teaches us about rising from the ashes. And someone sent me a quote. I think I even put it in the beginning of the book. It was, my barn having burned to the ground, I can now see the moon. So it was, yes, that burning was incredible. And then it became the reconstruction of my life. And so I wrote about it in terms of, oddly enough, the year that I wrote about it was the year that the Rockies were burning. So in 88...
What state were you in, by the way?
I was in Wyoming.
Okay.
And I was living outside of Jackson Hole. And I had moved back there after actually Animals as Teachers and Healers was published, because finally I had a job that didn't depend on the tourist community. So I was up there, and the park, that's when all the wildfires were just racing all across Wyoming all summer long. And so I wrote about the Yellowstone fires of 88, kind of in context with the own fire in my own house. Like, how did nature resurrect itself in the Yellowstone? And it was incredible, because actually another job I had was leading naturalist tours up into the Yellowstone. And I would have people on the tour bus saying, oh, it's such a shame, this burning, it will never be the same. How terrible that they let this happen. They let the park burn. And I was the one who had to teach them Yellowstone is a fire system. Many of the trees there will not regenerate unless they're in a fire. So I said, the year after, the park was more lush than had ever been seen, because all the green growth came back low. There was so much sunlight, right. So many creatures, just bounded back.
Well, it just got fertilized with the ashes too. Right?
Absolutely. And all that wood fire, it was incredible. And so I saw the process of burning as being a positive thing. And that's what I wrote about.
What was the name of that book?
that was Heart in the Wild.
Okay. Yeah, I just want them written down accurately because I want to read all of them.
Oh, you sweetheart. Thank you.
So, okay, so how did the progression after that happen, and which animals you were involved with and that sort of thing?
Well, when I was writing about all of that, I was very much involved with all of the big megaflora and fauna up in Yellowstone. On my own properties, I had moose. I had 3 bull elk who wintered with my horses.
Wow.
Bears coming through, and all that big, amazing stuff. And somewhere right around in there, actually had a chance to do some radio interviews with Oprah. And I was telling her about, she was saying, well, you're a very unusual woman. And I said, not so. I mean, not so. I'm living in an unusual place, but my feelings about the world and the way I see things, that's nothing totally unusual. It's cultivated by anybody who cares about the outside world. He said something like, well, when I go out to Target, I don't have to stop for a herd of buffalo.
Right.
And I said, well, that may be true, but don't let the drama of wolves and buffalo and things move you away from the intimacy and the depth of this. So years later, we left the Rockies and did many moves. I'm very gypsy. The longest I've ever lived in any one place since I graduated high school is the place I'm in now, and it's been 7 years. And previous to that, it was 2.5 years here, 1.5 years there, and I moved mostly within the West for jobs, for more opportunities, for things like that. And then we wound up here in Camas, Washington, right across the Columbia from Portland. The first time in my adult life I moved into town off of property. The first time I had neighbors on all 4 sides that I could actually throw a ball at and hit. And I can walk to downtown. I'm in a 1930s mill house with a small yard. And I felt that was appropriate at that time. And it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. And that comment of Oprah's about, well, you're kind of in unusual circumstances. How would we emulate any of that? So here I am. And so it's no longer wolves and, buffalo brigades. It's well, this morning I was delighted to discover, even at this late in the season, I've got a whopping big dragonfly larva in my bathtub pond. So that I had to tell my husband. It was like, oh my gosh, we've got another hellgrammite in there. And that little bathtub pond hosts peeper frogs and pollywogs. And to me, it's just as good as any nearby lake. All the life is all there. And in my yards, it's all the regular miscreants, the raccoons and the possums and the squirrels. So, and it's just as majestic to me. The feeling is just as deep and possibly even deeper, because when you're on big lands and tending them, you have to do big things. Big wheelbarrows, big gardens, big plowing. And here I'm on my hands and knees in the dirt a lot. So I've gotten a wonderful intimacy with a small plot of ground. And here is where I met bees. So,
Okay, that's interesting. So, and you said you're in Washington, right? Across the
Washington
river
State.
from Oregon. And so you've been there 7 years. So 7 years ago, you really got introduced to bees in an intensive way. How did that start?
Well, thanks to Jacqueline. We're colleagues now. And when I moved here, I was aware that my stamina was dropping seriously. I have a lot of health issues that have to do with treatment-resistant depression and incredible fatigue. So I have to marshal my resources and decide where to place them very carefully.
Sure.
And I realized that I used to be a wildlife rehabilitator, and I just could no longer do the long nights and the long days and the trauma of creatures continually dying in my hands.
You were rescuing them, I guess, right?
I was rescuing them. I was raising skunks and possums and just all birds, any kind of native wildlife. And so I grew to know them in that way, and they became like avatars to me. Their lives incredible. And
well, just as a quick question in the middle of that, when you're rescuing or saving a skunk, and I don't know if you're talking about baby ones or grown-up ones or both, how do you do that and stay smelling the same like you're normally smelling?
You don't, but you can minimize it. Baby skunks spray all the time because that's how they play. They play like kittens. They hold their tail straight up, they bounce around, really like Pepe Le Pew, and they spritz, spritz, spritz. But
so they must have a resistant sense of smell themselves, so they don't get driven crazy by that.
It doesn't bother them in the least. And but when they're young, it doesn't have the musk behind it, so it doesn't last. I can wash it off.
It's not as oil-based, basically.
Right. But with adult skunks, if you're patient and you're quiet, you can get them to do what you need them to do without them spraying you. It's a matter of being very still and very compassionate. And I worked in a humane society with this old burly guy, Roy Griggs, and he'd go out on all these calls and bring home all the stray dogs. And one night, some woman called him that a skunk was in her garage and she didn't know what to do. Well, normally we call an exterminator for that, because that was California, which did not allow you to release skunks.
Wow, they don't even allow you to let them?
No. If there's a skunk, it has to be dispatched because the rabies threat is great. So old Roy shows up at this woman's garage. They turn on the light. The skunk is sitting there. And bless his heart, Roy goes over to it and talks to it for a long time. And gets a little leash dropped around its neck and walks it out the garage. And the woman took pictures of it, and that's how big his heart was, and that's what you do. So
And that's how perceptive the skunk was, not to run away or attack or anything.
They're totally perceptive. I mean, all those animals are. Like when I've recovered possums injured on the road, they have more teeth than any North American mammal.
They have what? Sorry, you cut out for a second.
Teeth.
Oh, okay.
A huge mouth of teeth, and
they're always pictured with their mouth open and they
mouth
teeth.
Open.
Right.
That's their big crocodile mouth, and it's very, very frightening to people.
Yeah.
But if you approach them, even when they're injured by a car and they're a big adult, I've never had to use gloves with even an adult. They are so gentle. When you touch them gently, you give them a little spoonful of yogurt, and they're like, okay. And they just relax into your hands.
I suspect it's not just the physical touching and yogurt. It's also they sense your energy.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
Because if you came up with a lot of tension and fear and worry and stuff and gave them yogurt, they wouldn't buy it. I don't think.
Exactly. And that's why the animals that I know seem so different than the animals many other people know, because I meet them in a different place.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. So that was getting too stressful to rescue all the dying animals and having some of them die and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and it was just too tiring. After a night of being up every 2 hours, I wasn't very functional the next day.
Yeah.
So I decided, okay, something has to change. I've got this yard. I will want to be carrying or doing or serving something, because that's who I am. And I saw an ad on a meetup group for something called Sacred Bees, a workshop.
Wow.
So I went, and it was at Jacqueline's farm, Friendly Haven Rise Farm, and she had invited a apiculturist who was quite famous at the time. His name is Mikhail Joshin Tili, and he has 2 websites, and he's been working with bees for decades and decades. And his background was he was actually training to be a Zen priest. So his relationship with bees is not like most people's.
Right.
And we were with him for 2 days while he was just talking about the bee and their lives and the depth of their complexity and their mystery. And one of the little exercises he had us do was, there were 14 of us, and we stood kind of separated out in front of one of Jacqueline's beehives. And he had us to stand with our hands at our side and start toning certain tones. He'd start, we'd follow him. He did about 3 or 4 tones. And then he said, now we will wait in silence. And we stood there, and the hive came out. They just came out. Thousands of them. They came out, and they swirled around us, just swirling, swirling. They never touched any of us, but you could feel the flutter of the wings on your face.
Wow.
And we were just watching as the bees were hovering and moving between us. It was like liquid, like this liquid amber was surrounding us. And then they just swirled, and all of them back into the hive. And when I looked at around me, there were tears pouring down my face, and everybody had tears pouring down my face, their faces. And we couldn't even speak to what had happened. We didn't know what had happened. We just knew what we felt. And it was, oh, that's who bees are. That's who bees are. And I need to know this. This is, animals have been my teachers all my life, and this is something I have never experienced.
It sounds like there's intelligent life all over this planet except for humans, right?
Yes. We have so much to learn.
Yeah.
And so many teachers, but we approach them either with greed or with arrogance or with fear. And that doesn't make, you couldn't have a relationship like that with a married partner. Right. And you can't have it with your dog, and you sure can't have it with a hive full of bees. I mean, animals ask you to step forward with your best and your most authentic, not with your ego. So, you have to be able to access a deeper part of yourself to even have a relationship with creatures. I have a friend, and every time I see him, he has questions for me. Like, I saw this creature in my backyard, and he's describing an opossum, and he says, is it dangerous? Do I have to worry? My daughter plays out there. Yeah. And to me, it's astonishing that somebody who's in their 40s doesn't even know what that animal is. And then I overheard one conversation years ago that was it just broke my heart. I'm walking through a park. A father's walking with his 4-year-old. A squirrel comes bouncing across the road. The child says, "Oh, Papa, what's that? What's that?" And Papa says, "I don't know. Maybe someone here can tell us." And it's like, you don't even know how to say hello to a squirrel. You don't know the name squirrel in this life. Yeah. And those kind of things I just find heartbreaking. And yet it's the common tone. People, like you said, like me, beekeepers like me, are not that common. And
what people know about bees is they sting you.
They sting you. That's
the number one knowledge about bees.
And they give honey. They give honey.
Yeah, if you can get them out of the way so they don't sting you to death, you can steal the honey.
You have to fight them to get the honey. That's
absolutely, yeah. It's you or them.
Yes. So this, I guess I've always wanted to deepen my relationships with animals. And when I met Jacqueline, I saw that she already had that. She came by that naturally. She has this incredible ability to be a mediator and a channel, and she was born with it to a degree that I will never have. So I need to find different inroads. So I'm out here kind of coaching all the others like me who want to be on this path and need to find new tools all the time and finding ways to broaden it. Because I don't want anybody ever saying to me again, well, you're so unusual. How, I mean, most of us can't relate to that. Nope. I want to make it.
Well, you want to change that so it's not true anymore.
Yeah.
One of the interesting questions that comes up when you notice every one of these animals has this deep, conscious, self-aware consciousness and knows how you feel and responds to that and can harmonize with it if you know how to work with it. And bring up that harmony in yourself so that you can fit together. What about large carnivores? To what extent would it work with them?
I really think it completely depends on your own personal clarity. Especially if a wild animal is injured. So like with large carnivores, when I was young, I have... one of my sacred names has to do with the word wolf. And so I've always been extraordinarily drawn to and taught by the wolf energy. And so I used to read a lot of old wolf stories when I was young, which sadly enough were mostly about trapping. And they would say, and I've seen it in films, where when a wolf is in a trap and then the trapper comes to get it, the wolf is acquiescent, and they often will hold out their paw like, please help.
Wow. And
I believe that they're in absolute pain, and they're open to help, and they don't get it in that case.
And then the trapper comes and shoots the wolf or whatever
it is. Or
it
they're
is.
clubbed to death. Yeah.
Okay.
But
right.
so
Wow.
all those stories from the Bible about, like, what is it, the thorn being removed from the lion's paw, and then the lion lies down gently next to the little animal that took this thorn out. Even the apex predators are incredibly intelligent. They have very difficult lives, and they have to be masterful to be able to live. Yeah. And because of that, they have incredible depth. And like for me personally, because I'm so attracted to wolves, and I've never believed that it's right to own one, I've always been attracted to primitive breeds of dogs that still have a lot of their kind of natural capacity. And those are animals that are extremely bright, extremely stubborn, and extremely intuitive. So, living with them is it's always a challenge, but it's a fascinating challenge. It really calls you forth. Yeah. So the apex predators, yes, I would never hesitate to walk up to something huge and hurt. It's just not my nature to hold back.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder about, two comments. One is I can relate to your comment on wolves. I used to rescue them. And I found out that you have to become a dominant member of the pack, but in harmony with all the others. And you don't control them like dogs. They don't take orders.
Right.
But they do understand if you're in their system.
You negotiate with them.
Yeah. And you show that you're the one that they need to follow. You can pick them up or roll them on their back or do things like that, after which they understand the order of, the pecking order of the whole thing. But what I was thinking of is a large predator in the wild that's not injured, that happens to cross paths with you. I wonder to what degree you could express some kind of a harmony with them and have it work out, especially so that you don't get eaten and stuff like that.
Well, that was what I was going to say. The first thought that comes to mind is if they're really hungry and you are considered a food, then they will need to eat you.
Right.
But if you are accidentally crossing paths, you kind of run into each other, then I think that kind of attitude would work well. If they don't want to eat you, they don't want to be hurt, because an injury to them can mean death.
Yeah.
So, there's a kind of, well, here we are. Are you a danger to me? No. Okay, then.
Right. So you want to schedule your meetings not at meal times.
Exactly.
So we went back to where you went to Jacqueline's event, right? And what happened from there?
Well, then I just started taking all of her classes, and then I had an experience where I finally got to have my hands on bees, because when Jacqueline teaches, she teaches about bees. She doesn't go into her hives and open them up and show you bees. We don't like to disturb the bees just to teach people.
Okay.
So I was asked if I'd be interested in helping remove a large colony of bees from the eaves of a church. And they'd been there for a very, very, very long time. Wow. And it ran the whole length of the church, like over 100 feet long. Wow. And I came along to help. My last experience with bees had been being stung on the foot when I was a 6-year-old, and I blew up like a balloon, so I didn't know what to expect. But I borrowed a beekeeping jacket and showed up, and the church was huge, so the men were up on scaffolding. They were going to be removing the hive, literally comb by comb. And they said, okay, wow. Susan, you wait down there, and we are going to lower buckets to you. And they will be, some of them will be just honeycomb, and just set those aside. The bees will be on them, just leave it. Right. But ones are going to come, and they're going to have brood. They're all little sealed, little brown patches. That's brood. And you're going to need to take those and put them right side up. You got to figure which is right side up, and tie them onto a little wooden strip and set them in a hive. Okay, here we go.
So you mean you brought the hives with you?
Yes,
right,
so we had like 3 hives there all lined up, because this colony was so large, we knew it would have to be placed into many hives. So I'm there, and the bucket comes down, and I'm like shaking with excitement. My gosh, this is really going to happen. Right. And Jacqueline's only advice to me when I did this was, she said, the only thing you need to remember is just to stay calm. That's all you need to do. Exactly. And so the bucket came down. I was excited but calm, and I looked in, and it was like, oh, okay. My idea was that the brood combs were going to come down. I had no idea that the bees would be completely covering them on both sides, because bees won't leave their brood. Right. Okay, so I have to lift up this piece of comb, and it's covered with bees, and because it's covered with bees, it's really warm, and the wax is warm, and it hangs over like Dolly's watches, right? Just blip.
Well, now one question about that. You said because it's covered with bees, it's warm. Mm-hmm. Bees are not warm-blooded animals, so where does that heat come from?
Bees can regulate the temperature of their hive, and in that way, the actual hive environment itself is a mammal. The bee itself is an insect, but the hive itself acts like a mammal. It nurses its young, it regulates its temperature, it defends itself, it creates a home. It has all of the attributes.
So was it were the sections you took down warmer than the outside air?
The pieces were warmer because the bees will flutter their wing muscles. They can detach their wings and rapid fire their shoulder muscles and create heat. So they will flutter all over that comb to keep the brood warm. Because
so it's kind of like the friction that each one is creating in the muscles. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. And they can create a tremendous amount of heat.
It's like rubbing 2 sticks together, basically, type thing.
Yes. So they create this warmth on this wax combs to protect the babies. So I'm lifting this, and I have to lay it down so it goes. So some bees are being set on the table over these two strings, and I'm trying to tie them up, and the bees are all over me, and they're looking at my hands. And I had on gloves, and I realized this isn't going to work. You can't tie a knot gloves, and you can't touch these bees without pressure with gloves. So I thought, okay. So I pulled off the gloves, and I started working with them. And years ago, I sundanced with Lakota for 4 years. And I started singing Sundance songs for the bees.
Is that where you hook these metal hooks into your chest and it pulls on your skin? And
but I did it. I did the scarification on my wrist, so I've got the scars here.
Okay.
And the women don't attach to the tree. The Sundance chief takes the pegs in your wrist and just rips them out.
I see.
So, so I was singing the Sundance songs just all day to these bees.
Right.
And in the end of the day, we had probably moved about 80,000 bees, and I had 4 stings. And that was because I had accidentally smushed one too hard and she nailed me.
Yeah.
And I went home so new to all this that everything was precious. They gave me a little bucket of honeycomb, and they gave me the old comb that wasn't even used anymore. It was so derelict and covered with spider webs and things. And I brought that home, and I'm looking at this. Look at this comb, and smelling it and showing it to my husband. Look at this, bees. I was just completely hooked at that point. And then one of the hives, the fellows who were taking the bees down asked if I'd like to put it in my yard. And they said, we'll keep an eye on the bees and kind of show you what to do. And I was ecstatic. So I moved them to my yard. And the fellow who placed them in my yard was, I didn't know, but basically kind of a very careless beekeeper. He didn't come much. He didn't tell me much. And I was kind of on my own with them, calling Jacqueline. Didn't want to bug her much.
And this was a standard cubicle hive, right?
No, fortunately, this was what's called a Warre hive. So it's a smaller cube. And rather than 4-sided wooden frames, there's just a little bar strip across the top. So the bees can build the comb any way that they want.
Okay.
But I made a tremendous amount of mistakes with them that summer, just not knowing. And it was a very difficult summer. And, there was a divorce in our family, and our stepson came to live with us for 3 months with his child, a grandchild now who was 3. And I was having a lot of problems with my medications. I was really struggling. And then, moving into this house that had to be completely rebuilt. It wasn't livable when we moved in. So there was a lot of work that had to be done. And so there's all this chaos and tension. And meanwhile, I'm trying to do best by the bees. And I don't know what the best is yet. Even as much as I've studied and looked, when they really show up in front of your face, it's almost like you have this total amnesia. Like, who are you and what do I do?
Right.
So in the very end, after my stepson and stepdaughter moved out, I just had a complete emotional collapse. It was like I was exhausted and drained, and there was no way to see a doctor because I'm on Medicare, and the psychiatrists and mental health providers in both these states almost don't exist unless you have a lot of money. So I could not get myself in front of a provider who could help me. So I lied. I went to the emergency room, and I told them I was going to kill myself. And I had a story all made up, and I told it all day.
That should work.
Yeah, that was it.
It puts you in another category, right? So they have to try to help you.
They had to try to help me. So they put me in a lockdown facility for a week, which to me was like a bed and breakfast. I got fed, I got to rest, and I got in front of the doctor. And so he shifted my medication around. And then when I was stabilized, I came back. I was gone a week. The first thing I did was I ran up the hillside to see the bees. Are they okay? Are they okay?
Yeah.
And I saw coming and going from the entrance. I thought, oh, they're okay. And I ran up, and it was yellow jackets coming and going, and the hive had perished.
Wow.
And I just wept in front of that hive because I knew the failings had been mine. I thought the failings were mine. Yes, I did a lot of failures, but I've since learned also that cutouts are really hard on bees. They're really hard on bees.
Also, they don't have a queen, right?
Well, they didn't, but if they had eggs in the hive, they would have tried to make one. And I believe that they probably never made one. And that was why they slowly just perished.
Yeah.
But when I sat with them and felt so bad, and I said, what do I learn from this so that I don't repeat this, and that this wasn't at such a cost to you?
Right.
And the thought that came to me was, it's not true that you're never given more than you can handle. Sometimes you're given too much and you don't become stronger for it. You break down and you just try to get by, and that's the best that you can do. And sometimes that has to be enough.
Yeah.
And the message to me was, to never let myself break down that far, because there would be a point from which I would not come back. So it's like, be very careful with this and be mindful. Take very good care of yourself, because otherwise things will land on your plate that will be too much for you to bear.
Right. And if you don't take care of yourself, how are you going to help anybody, human or otherwise, right?
That's why my whole health quest is about, I want to get my stamina strong so I can serve more. I mean, there's so much that is out there to do that I don't in doing.
And humans are such slow learners that, instead of having that question at age 2 or whenever we need to, start applying it, we wait until things get really hard.
Yeah.
It's almost a constant pattern.
Yeah.
But then whatever you learn really sinks in, though.
Yeah. When they're hard lessons like that, you never forget.
Yeah. So you must have got some more hives, I guess, right?
Some more hives. So after that, I decided that I would bring home 3 hives of my own. So Jacqueline gave me 2 of her older ones, the little Warre square boxes, and I bought one. And that first summer, I went out and did my first swarm collecting. I went out and found, was called about, in the springtime, bees swarm, and conventional beekeepers, a lot of them have this belief that they swarm because the hive gets really crowded. So once it's crowded, then the bees have to go off and swarm. And it's bunk. Bees know exactly how much room they have, and they will work it accordingly. A swarm is their reproductive impulse. So whether they have room or not, if they have enough stores, and if the hive knows that they're healthy enough to have a baby, they will send out half of the hive with the old queen and go find a new colony, and now we will be 2. So those normally wind up in big balls that look like hanging pineapples, off a tree limb or a parked car or a fence. And so I would go out and gather these and bring them home and, home them in my hives. And
they're not on something, right? They're just on each other.
They're on each other. I don't know how they do that, because it's, you'll look at a swarm that's hanging off of a single branch.
Yeah.
And it's those initial bees across the top that are holding
the whole thing,
holding on to them. And they must have the strongest little fingers in the world, because they're supporting that whole hanging mass. And I think the biggest swarm anybody weighed in Portland a couple of years ago was 14 pounds.
How big across is that? Is that like a couple of feet or something?
Yeah. Okay. That would be like something, let's see, what type of ball? Considerably larger than a basketball.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It would be like one of those big medicine balls they have in a gym, that you work
Yes. Yeah.
exercise on.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what
Wow.
Jacqueline had taught me and what I'd learned through the swarm classes was when bees swarm out, they're almost in like an ecstatic trance state. So
Okay.
they're coming out, they're loaded with honey, they're so full they almost can't sting because the bees have to turn their little bellies up to sting you. So they're like totally honey drunk because they're carrying stores for 3 days. The bees can hang there for 3 days and keep feeding each other on their honey stores. And then they have to find a home and they have to get wax built so they can start bringing in nectar. But hanging there like that, they're very still, they're very calm, and they're exceedingly gentle.
Wow.
And you don't need any kind of gear to collect them. You just, my bee suit on a swarm is a tank top, shorts, and barefoot. I mean,
Wow.
you just and if they land in a difficult spot, like a fence or on a wall, I had one land like a big patch right on a garage wall. Well, you can't clip them off and put them in. And I just use my hands. I just learned how to just scoop them in my hands and sing to them and place them in a bucket.
So you don't pull the ball off, right?
No.
You lift it?
Well, if it's hanging from a branch, the kindest thing to do is clip the branch and take the whole thing and set it into a bucket. If that's not an option, then it's literally just a very gentle scoop, one by one, and you can scoop a whole hive up like that.
So the scooping is taking the pressure off the ones holding by their fingers, right?
Yes.
So they realize, there's no more weight, and they let go.
Yeah. And you'll end up with a big clump just kind of falling into your hands. And then you set them in a bucket and just very gently just move your hands like this, and they'll leave. And then once you have scooped the queen, which you usually can't see, she's kind of hidden in there. Once the queen's gone into the bucket, then the bees will start to make a sound. They'll be sitting in the swarm, and all of a sudden they'll start going, and if you put the bucket up next to them, they'll all just start walking in. It's like, there's the queen. Now we know. Here we go. And they'll follow. So, but you have to be really tuned in to hear that sound, to hear it. And
you think, can bees hear sound? Do we know that?
Yes, bees hear well, and they also really sense vibration. I don't think they have what you would call ears, but a lot of the hairs on their bodies are touch receptors. So they can feel vibrations, which is what we do. That's how we hear. It's like a vibratory thing. So they feel vibration across their fur, across their antenna, across their eyes. And that's how they read it. That's how they read sound. So far as I know, it's a mystery.
Yeah. Sound is different to different kinds of animals. Like I know a really different example is like with snakes. They're deaf. They don't have the bones for ears or anything, but they pick up the sound through the whole surface that's touching the ground.
Yeah.
And they respond just like it's sound.
Yeah.
So the bees might do it through the hairs, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So I learned how to kind of gather them like that and understand who the queen was to them, how they will move wherever she's at, and then homing them, and then, going through kind of some more mistakes. One of my things I'm trying to overcome is, ever since I've been little, to me, having a relationship with something means getting my hands on it.
Yeah.
Whether it's people, if I had a job now, I'd be outed on sexual harassment because I'm always patting people on the knee or rubbing their shoulders or something, and it's like, oh God, that doesn't cut it anymore, does it? But I'm that way, so that hence the work with humane societies and wildlife centers is hands-on. And with bees, you are taught that conventionally there are things we can do to help bees. And so my thinking was that meant like hands-on. I can help them the way I move the combs around. If I take a weak hive and add it to a strong hive, and if I can consolidate the hive in the winter so that they don't have to heat all this space, that there are hands-on things that I can do. And I realized, and the bees taught me by failing, that pretty much any technique, any management technique that I did, offering a queen, combining hives, moving brood around, reducing hive size, moving hives, everything I did ended up being detrimental to them. It set them back. It was no help at all. And Jacqueline then too was coming to that exact same sense. And that is about when she handed the beekeeping classes over to me. She said, I've taught this for so long, and I'm different with my bees now. I can't even teach this way now. So I kind of rewrote the class and started teaching, and both Jacqueline and I got into lockstep about the less we do, the better off. And we started looking at ways that we genuinely could help bees. And the more we looked, the more we realized that conventional beekeeping practices were deadly in a lot of ways. And
why don't you give some examples of that so that people know what you're talking about?
Sure. Well, what we've learned recently, and this is very recently, within the last year, that a square box for bees is not healthy for them, because bees maintain the air, the healing air, the sterile air within the hive by working in the round and being able to affect every bit of heating and cooling, air coming in and air going out that happens in that hive. It's very hard for them to work with corners. And if you look in the corners of these boxes, a lot of them are moldy and there's moisture. And we've learned that there's a lot of molds, especially ground molds, that bees aren't accustomed to because they were an arboreal creature. They were off the ground. So ground bacteria and molds, they will clean them up, but it will kill them. So it's like, okay, you've got these square cornered boxes. This doesn't work. Now, the person who made those boxes was a guy named Lorenzo Langstroth. And he made them to be double walled. And he said, if you don't have double walls for insulation, don't use these because they're no good for bees. The bees, he even realized, had to be heavily insulated in their hive. The way you have to think about bees is you want the interior of the nest to be close to oblivious to the outside temps. You want these temperatures affecting the colony very, very slowly. Now,
does that prevent the moisture in the mold?
Totally.
Oh,
totally.
Okay.
Because moisture and mold comes from condensation. The bees are warm, the side of the hive is cold.
I see. Okay.
And you get wet and you get mold.
Right.
And bees also like the air in their hive to be very humid, almost like vaporized air that moves throughout the colony and is infused with propolis, which is both their architectural glue and their medicine that they make for themselves out of tree resins. And so they infuse the air in the hive. They work better when it's a round cylinder. They can keep it completely covered, and they work best when they're crammed in. They don't like extra space. They are commanded by their biology to fill space, because the bees understand, probably at a level we don't grasp, that empty space and untended space can be dangerous space. It can become cold. It can become sickly. So bees like to be in a real tight space. Well, conventional beekeeping stacks hives on and off all the time. Here's a hive body. Here's another hive body. Here's a honey super. Build up the hive. So the bees are literally compelled to be in there filling those boxes all the time. So what we say, busy bees, these bees that are actually working like slaves, they never have a rest. They can never stop. They must keep working to keep themselves safe and warm. And we have a scientist friend who's been computing a lot of the data on bees in these kinds of hives. And thank God for people who have minds that work like this, because I could never have followed this through. Through a long series of equations, he has ascertained that it takes bees 20 million hours of bee time to fill one of these boxes with wax and honeycomb.
Well, how can you do that without a million bees?
Well, you're doing it because the bees are being born to the tune of around 1,500 a day, and they're dying in the field about 1,000 to 1,500 a day. So it's constantly pumping in new, constantly pumping in new. But in those hives, you know, they're always being stacked, the bees only turn to self-care when most of us do, when you have some extra time. I have time for a bath tonight. I have time to put my feet up and rest. Right. Well, in those boxes, they never rest. And so all of their higher qualities can never come forth, and all of their healing qualities can't. They stop grooming each other. They stop picking on mites. They stop building up the propolis walls. They stop all of that because they have to get that box filled.
So it's economics versus what they were designed for, basically. Right?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And I don't know what's going to happen to commercial beekeeping. Last year, they said that, you know, the national numbers were that 40% of managed hives were lost across the country. So I don't know how people with 1,000 hives can keep incurring those kinds of losses and stay in business.
Well, I mean, and besides the possible mismanagement, like you're saying, for the square, you know, cube-shaped hives and all that, they're adding the EMF pollution, which is deadly to all life forms, even trees.
Yes.
And they're about to really ramp that up, and they've got the GMO pollens around, which create cancer in the higher animals and probably hurt the bees.
And for the bees and the insects, you know, I don't know if you read the recent studies. They estimate that the insects in our yards face a pesticide load 50 times greater than they did 50 years ago.
Yeah, and 50 years ago it was really bad too, and it's just gotten much more extreme.
Yeah.
You know.
And so, you know, those are so when I teach a class now, my whole class has become, what do you do for bees to keep them as stress-free as you can? That's the only management thing you have to consider. And basically it's offering them a very secure, insulated nest. We don't buy bees. I don't support the buying of bees. It just moves pathogens cross-country. The bees are weak. They're sick when they get to you. And that's no way to have a successful hive. So all of our students go out and get swarms. I share my swarms. So we take wild bees in and offer them a home. And if they need to be fed, we'll feed them honey. And that's pretty much what we do for them. And then we just sit back and wait.
If you're starting new hives with wild bees, what about all the people who talk about, well, there's, you know, some kinds of bees that are really aggressive and dangerous and some kinds of bees that are not. How do you tell the difference, and is that even true?
It's true. It's true because many years ago now in South America, they did indeed try to do the study of finding a different kind of bee that they could interbreed with the European honeybee to see if they could make it more resistant to the varroa mites. Because conventional beekeeping will tell you that their only problem is varroa mites, and it's not. But they started breeding an African bee down in South America with the European honeybee, and they discovered that the first few hybridizations of these actually made them even harder to deal with. And then somebody's always leaving a gate open. Somebody left part of the lab open, and a bunch of those bees got out, and they just had a field day down in the South America, perfect climate, tons and tons of forage, oh my gosh, and then they've been moving up steadily from the south since. And many of the bees, probably almost all in Texas, have Africanized genes in them now, and many bees in Southern California, Arizona, all of them have to work with these kinds of bees. And some of them are very aggressive, and some hives are not. It's a case-by-case basis. So if I lived in those communities, I would always bring out my gear if I were gathering a swarm.
Well, and why would you want to gather a swarm that's not going to be workable anyway, right? I mean, that doesn't sound like it would be very good.
That these are really good observations and excellent questions. There are people without out yards who are serious honey producers who like these bees. They just suit up to the hilt. They keep them far away from the public, and they work with those bees. And they are disease resistant. They're very strong, but you have to be very careful when you're working with them, and you probably would have to have all your property posted about it. We don't have that issue up north, because I've been told that one of the habits of Africanized or African bees is when they get very cold, like in a cold winter, they disperse. They fly out and they disperse. And honeybees contract, and they keep themselves warm. So this dispersal, if they go out in the winter dispersed, they'll all die.
Right.
So they haven't made it this far north. So we have these very laid back, kind of old hippie bees up here.
So it's just more dangerous working with the aggressive ones, right? I mean,
yes.
And that's all you can do if you're in a warmer climate.
Yeah.
Apparently.
What people in warmer climates do, and so I'm very glad I don't live in a warmer climate, because I probably would not keep bees if that was the case. What they can do is they can buy a queen bee in a package who has no African genes. Mm-hmm. And they can introduce her to that hive. They can go in and pinch the queen that's there, and then see if the hive will take a new queen. And if the hive does, within weeks, the whole genetics of that hive will change, because the hive that's there is essentially dead. The new queen starts laying. She has totally different genes, totally different drones, and then pretty soon all of the old bees die out, and you have a new hive, and it's friendlier.
Is there a danger of it being invaded by ones that are not friendly?
If that hive swarms the next year, right, the old queen goes off, and if the new queen that is bred in there, if she goes out and mates with any Africanized drones, then she can bring some of that back in, and you'll have to just watch and see. Okay. If she's calm. Yeah.
So it's somewhat more risky and delicate in the southern climates, I guess, in general.
Yes. They have their hands full. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And so back, setting that question aside for a minute, if you look at the issue with the current bee industry, with so many of the bees dying, I mean, big percentages of the hives dying. Mm-hmm. There are all these external factors that we mentioned, like the pesticides that even now people make fun of Rachel Carson and some of these people that were, they're saying, oh, there's no environmental emergency. This is all fraud. There is a lot of fraud. I mean, the whole climate change thing is full of fraud, but there is massive real environmental emergencies that threaten all life on the planet. It's just not what the crazy side of that is talking about. It's completely different. But if you're aware of the real one, then you know that the pesticides and the EMF pollution, the GMOs, the chemical fertilizers which destroy the soil ecosystem, and all that stuff is not just unintelligent, it's intentional, not by the farmers who are using it, because they're pretty much just believing what they're told, but the people above the universities who are designing this stuff on purpose have negative intentions. If you're trying to raise bees in this environment, the question comes up, in this environment or not, can you harmoniously mesh making this an economically viable business with taking good care of the bees? Is that even possible?
I don't believe that migratory beekeeping will ever be possible.
Which means taking it out to an orchard and renting it out or something.
Yes, bees are creatures of place, and they know their place. They, like my bees, they know what the winter forage here is. I've had these bees for a few years now. So oddly enough, even though it's a whole new batch of bees and, new queens coming in from swarms, they know where the forage is for winter. All of my bees left my yard about a week ago, and they're all over in the ivy now. And they didn't know that all these bees are new to ivy. They weren't here last year, but they know where it is because that mind is in that hive.
It's transmitted, right?
So moving around a lot is deadly to them, and it's also the way that all the bee diseases are shipped around the country within a year instead of decades.
Right, exactly, and of course they're feeding them sugar water, and so they end up using antibiotics and drugs and things that make them even weaker, and then they need more drugs, and then they end up dying. But if you took away the migratory aspect, which is putting them on a truck and renting them to a field or a crop somewhere else, and you just had them in one place, even then, there's a serious question whether you can make it economically viable to produce honey for a business in that one spot and still take care of the bees the right way. Is it possible to do that at the same time?
We're all, I think, asking ourselves that question now, and we all would like to know. Right now, I have students who adore their bees and they really want some honey. Okay. And so what we're saying is, what we're saying right now is, don't treat honey as a sweetener, treat it as a medicine. If you treat it as a medicine, you don't need as much. If you want it as a sweetener, just go out and buy, agave syrup or something. Just don't use honey for that. And so that would reduce the need for the volume of it. But basically, the people that in our group who want to keep bees and get some honey are they're taking a standard Langstroth box. They're putting a round, tubular, what would you call that? A sleeve inside the hive so that the corners are all gone. It becomes round, and you pack all the way around that round sleeve with straw or wool so that the hive becomes heavily insulated. Now the bees have this space. You put the small little wood strips across so that they can have that whole area sacrosanct. Then you can put one medium box above them. It's a medium box from a standard hive is about that tall, just, like 4 or 5 inches tall. You set that on top and let the bees fill it and say, if this is a good year for the bees, I can take that honey next spring.
Is that top section insulated the same way or not?
The top section would also be heavily insulated across the top and down the sides.
And you've got the tube extending into it from the bottom?
No, you've got the tube that goes up to this one portion, and then the box extends out the sides. So the box fits the box.
So how do you insulate that top section?
The top section ends up completely insulated with the honey. Honey is very insulative.
Okay.
Or you could also strip outside insulate that one box. But if you, basically we would then leave that box and wait until the next spring.
Yeah.
And then next spring, just before the big flower blooms start, you can take that honey because the bees can replace it back.
They've got time, right?
They have time, and all the flowers are just coming on. So that is taking some. And if they've had a rough winter, you wouldn't take it at all. If the bees are having a hard time building up, if the numbers have dropped considerably, if they don't want to swarm because they're small and they're coming back, whatever happened to them during the winter, then you wouldn't take the honey through the summer. You'd say, this is a year where I'm not taking it.
So the current massive honey industry is really not viable, according to what you're saying, with, being able to produce massive amounts for the public market.
Yes.
That way.
Yes.
And it would be even more so with the question of this huge industry that is selling pollen.
Yes.
There's no way to do that and take care of the bees, right?
Not really. Not really, because basically what you're doing is that's stealing from the babies.
That's the baby food, right?
Yeah. So when it knocks off the little pollen blocks, it's like, oh, how sad for the bees. They were out there how long packing that stuff while they come home, but we just take it.
Yeah, and it kind of scrapes it off as they go back into the hive, right?
Right.
And then they can take it out of a trough or something.
Yeah. So the bees never get to have any use of it.
Well, you can get even more extreme, the sale of royal jelly. Right? I mean, how are they doing that? I think I'm going to say that I'm not sure. I think that they take it from queen cells. I think they have the bees produce a bunch of queen cells, and I think it's taken from that, but I'm not sure. Those extraction industries for honey and wax and propolis and everything else. Just so totally against that. Right. I just stay away from it. I don't even have to know about it to know it's bad. I mean, all these little pieces of information, I see them as clues to envisioning a system where total harmony is possible.
Well, Rudolf Steiner used to say about bees and honey that he said honey should never be sold. He said it is so precious that you could not possibly put a dollar value on it. It's remarkable. And basically, honey is to be shared among neighbors. So that goes back to backyard hives, when everybody had a hive or two, right? And you harvested a few combs of honey here and there, and you kept your bees. And that was the beekeeping system. Those big square boxes enabled us to stack and haul bees and grow the hives massively tall. And that became a commercial industry.
Yeah, and I'm not saying anything about money being bad. I don't believe that for a second. But how you make the money is critical, right?
Yes.
And also, when you're taking care of the bees, you don't use the boxes anymore, right?
No.
So why don't you talk about how you changed from keeping them in boxes to what you're doing now?
Yes. A few years ago, I discovered the notion of straw hives. And I started looking into them. They're called skeps. They're the thing that's shaped like that, like a standard, I don't know, you'll see honey servers in that shape. It's a real symbolic shape, I think.
Right. It's kind of a narrow dome type thing, right?
Yes. It's kind of a lumpy pyramid without corners.
No edges, right.
And so I discovered those. I was fascinated by them. They didn't exist in this country, and I spent several years learning how to make them. And I turned all of my wooden hives, my square boxes, into planters. So they're now herb gardens and things. And I put all my bees in these woven hives that are like 2 inches thick, and the insulation is incredible. They're that round shape that the bees like. They're small, so the bees can totally fill them. And I place these on top of something that our group calls an echo floor. When bees lived in trees many years ago, and they lived with up to 8,000 organisms and creatures in the hive with them, in that nest. And these were considered beneficial symbionts to the bees. And they included certain bacteria, let's see, mushrooms, mycelium networks within a tree. These little creatures called book scorpions that would climb on the bees and pull off their bee lice and tend them. That ants move in, pill bugs have moved in, earwigs have moved in, wax moths live down there. And then if the comb becomes really funky, the wax moths will go up and work the funky comb, and the bees will allow it. When they're done, the wax moths will move back down. So I have a whole nation of symbionts beneath each hive. And in a box hive, that doesn't exist. The bees have been taken away from their village. So our club says whatever kind of hive you have, you can always put one of those boxes on the bottom. Even if you've just got a standard Langstroth box, you can put another box on the bottom, fill it full of mulch, tree bark, some straw, and leave it alone and leave it open to the bottom of the hive, and that will help serve the bees. And you can take that square hive. If you don't want to put the round inside of a standard hive and pack straw or wool around it, you can still put hard styrofoam panels on the outside and on the lid. So you will definitely have a whole lot more insulation, plus all the helpful village down below. That's one small step that you could do, and do nothing else and see if that worked. You know, it's there are ways to move from being completely human-centered in your care of bees to becoming completely bee-centered in your care of bees. It's a nice wide band, and you can walk it slowly or as swiftly as you want.
So what is the dome-shaped hive, the woven hive, set on again? What's the base?
Some of mine are set on just square boxes, like a box with a top and a bottom that the skep can fit on. And then I cut a hole in the top of the box that's maybe that round. And I put the skep over it so the bees have access, and the creatures down below have access to come up to the bees.
Is it on the ground?
No, we teach that bees should never be kept on the ground. They're not a ground creature. And here in the Northwest, we have really damp ground. So all of our hives and our clubs are on tables, at least on tables. And some
with a
people,
box full of mulch or something under the main skep. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So you've got kind of this like two-sided, this combination of this bottom box and this upper hive.
Okay, so let's look for a second. If you were not thinking of getting honey or pollen out of the hive, which obviously you're putting way down the list, instead of the primary reason that people mainly do it now is getting those things, what are your benefits from bees without honey and pollen?
Oh my gosh. I'm no gardener, but my yard looks like Eden. Yeah. And my neighbors, once I got bees and started actually having them survive, started talking to me about our yards have never looked so good. Your bees are over here. We're putting out watering stations for them. My flowers have never bloomed like this. My neighbor had what he thought was an ornamental pear tree in his yard for 20 years. The bees came and he got pears for the first time. He was in shock. Wow. So I've kept a very extensive journal of my yard and the bees coming. And in the first year, I'm talking about my little hillside saying, I'm planting all kinds of perennials in it. And I wrote down, it's doing okay. It's coming along. There's nothing lush. And now my backyard looks like a jungle. It's lush. I mean, what bees bring, and Jacqueline probably discussed some of this, is when bees fly over a garden, there's a light that comes through their wings. It's like a prism, and it allows a certain quality of light to reach the earth. When they land on a flower, when they fly, they build up a static charge in their wings. That's how come pollen light clings to them easily. when they touch a plant, they zap it, right? Because they built up an electrical charge, like you do if you go across a rug and then you touch a handle and it goes bink.
It discharges, yeah.
Yeah. So there's this little bink, 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 bink. Now think of a sunflower with 100 bees landing on it that day. Bink, 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 bink. The flower has grown up to be attractive to bees, so it has a relationship. It uses that energy. It needs that energy. Plants that are pollinated by human hand or by machine do not produce the quality or the amount of the fruit, and the plant itself does not look as healthy. That's what bees bring to the yard, and nobody is counting that. And that's like everything. That's
okay, so that calling them little pollinating machines is not very perceptive.
They're life bringers. They keep plants alive. You know, without pollinators, we would lose a lot of plants that we love now. And you know, even the wind pollinated plants are benefited by pollinators visiting them too. So that's the joy for me, is seeing, you know, bees made this place. Bees made my yard. It's like, how did this happen? It was the bees.
So they're not just pollinators.
No, they're life bringers. They bring life. They touch the plants and they give them life. Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
And they also only pollinate from the strongest and the best plants. So my first couple of years when I was planting my hillside, it had been covered with many layers of weed cloth over the years, and then finally black plastic, and then rock. So I ripped up the whole hillside, and the whole hillside stunk because the soil had gone anaerobic. It was dead, it was compacted, and it stunk.
Right.
And everything that grew in it and flowered, there were no pollinators on. Not the mason bees, not the honey bees, nothing. And it was, you know, and I could have said to myself, well, there's no bees in the area, I guess.
Yeah.
But what was really happening, and Jacqueline was reminding me, the toxins are coming out of that soil. Once that's cleaned out, you'll start to see the bees. And that was right. So now when I see something in my yard that isn't doing well, I know that that plant's just not doing well. And the bees don't want to move those genetics of that plant forward.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of wisdom that is blocked by thinking about things and trying to figure them out, right?
Yes, yes, yes. That's why I think I like really amorphous terms for bees. I like the word mysterious for bees. I heard about a remarkable thing about bees that just goes to like pondering, because you can't really figure these things out. In Holland last year, I listened to a bee master tell us that when they separated out the wax in a hive that had perished, when they separated out the drone comb, which is larger cells, from the maiden comb, the worker bee cells, melted it and turned it into candles, the wax was different and the candles burned differently. And it was totally obvious to everyone in the room that they were not the same.
Right.
And he said, we have no idea why this is. Is it the fact that the drones were in it and there's something in their metabolism? Do the bees work the wax differently for a drone cell? I mean, what is this? And so I think that there's so many mysteries that exist, and the human field is so limited on what we can actually even imagine.
Right.
That our imagination doesn't extend to the wonder of bees. For example, years ago, somebody told a story about I read this, that they just discovered a new use for seals with their whiskers. So they thought that the whiskering, helped them like negotiate tight places or something. And somehow they discovered that in cloudy, murky water, something in those whiskers allows the seal to perceive every fish or creature that passes in front of it through the whiskers. And the whiskering will tell them how big that creature is or how small. So if it's something like a whale, well, we're not going to take a bite out of this thing. But if it's a nice little, flounder, maybe we'll go for it. So they use these as essentially another pair of eyes. And we didn't even think that would be possible, so we couldn't imagine that use.
Yeah.
So I wonder how many things that animals are doing we have absolutely no imagination for, just none. And they're doing these remarkable things in the world that we're sadly, pathetically oblivious to.
Right. Probably almost everything they're doing is in that category.
Yes. Because they couldn't survive otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the thing that humans can't imagine is that they don't know everything.
Yes. And I think, okay, I'll run this one by you. I think there's a lot of humans who believe that we can know everything, that we are able to know everything. We just have to find it out. I don't believe that. I mean, our brain is great and wondrous and all, but I don't believe that. I think there's stuff that is just simply beyond the possibility of our ken.
Well, it's beyond the possibility of the intellect to figure out, but I think we have other faculties where that harmony doesn't belong only to bees and other animals. We could have it too. It's just, when you connect to that, the awareness that comes in is not stuff that you have to figure out.
Yes. Yes. That's why these days with my bees, it becomes hard to explain sometimes why I do what I do. It's just, this works for them. Well, how do you know it works for them? I just know.
Yeah, well, it's like being asked, how do you know the sky is blue? I mean, talking about before the chemtrails and everything.
Yeah.
you look at it and it's blue. It's like right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really deep way of knowing something, and your eyes are not your only perceptive faculties.
Yes. In fact, they're probably in some ways more of a deceptive faculty, huh? They can
really can be. Yeah, but there's something that humans have as a way of knowing that has nothing to do with the intellect. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have the same limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing us to fit into the harmony of everything, mm-hmm. which we kind of got obviously disconnected from, right?
Yeah. And bees embody it as a unity consciousness that's just incredible. And I think that we are really intimidated by the idea here in America of creatures that work on behalf of others all the time to the extent of their entire life. And I remember on Star Trek when they used to have those episodes about the Borg, this like hive mind, and mm-hmm. how these were like soldiers to the Borg, and how this was a bad thing. And it certainly could be. But in this case, this living for the whole is not enslavement, it's devotion, and in a way forward for 30 million years for bees. It is work.
Well, I think the reason it can work is you don't have some crazy tyrant playing the part of the master of the whole thing.
Yes.
You've actually got that spirit that they're working for that is harmony. It's not going to misuse them.
Exactly.
In the human translation of it, it's a mess because you have they always try to sell a system, well, for the greater good, you mm-hmm. give up your autonomy and then mm-hmm. they make you a slave. Mm-hmm. And that version of it's not very nice.
Yeah.
But that's not happening with the bees or any of those creatures.
No, there are not many creatures in this world willing to give up their reproductive rights. And maiden bees which most people call the workers, do that voluntarily.
Right.
Because they are perfectly functioning bees, and they can lay eggs just like all the rest, and they give it up in service to the queen.
They just work. That's all.
They work and they tend the queen. They have discovered that in giving up that reproductive energy and putting it to the good of the hive, they leave that reproductive energy up to one big bee, and they are just in service to the rest of the hive. They don't have to concern themselves with that. But something also remarkable about bees is that in extreme cases, in a hive, if a queen bee perishes and they're not able to make a new one, the way they make a new queen is if there are eggs that she has laid, and if they any of those eggs can be turned into a queen by how it's fed and tended and the cell that it's drawn out with her.
Yeah.
So any egg can become a queen. So the maiden bees, if they can't create a new queen because there are no eggs, maybe the eggs are too old, the hive will die. So what the bees can start doing is they can start laying drones. So many of the maiden workers start to lay drone eggs because that's their second reproductive means.
Now, clarify that there's a different kind of egg for a drone than for a worker?
The workers, the drone egg is an unfertilized egg.
Okay.
Any egg that's laid that's unfertilized can become a drone.
Okay.
So when the queen lays, when she wants to lay workers, she arranges her uterus so that she spits out a fertilized egg. And then when she goes over to a drone cell, she shifts around and spits out an unfertilized egg.
Okay.
So the fact that even an unfertilized egg can become alive is amazing to me. But
yeah.
So the maiden bees will start laying drones. A whole hive will be drones. And they say, good, we're getting our ancestors out into the world. This is our hope for the future. And then the hive will perish. In very rare cases, and it's been documented, the maidens will actually lay a queen cell. They'll start laying queen cells. They'll treat them like queens. And they can hatch a fully functional egg-laying queen out of an unfertilized maiden egg.
Okay, so this is the insect version of the virgin birth.
Yes. Isn't it remarkable? I mean, maybe that's where the idea of the virgin birth came from.
Somebody watched bees. Yeah.
Bees. There are certain insects that are capable of this. It's like in desperate straits when there's no hope.
Only happens when there's no alternative.
Yes, and the study that I read about it, which was the study over here in the States, was conducted by a woman named Dee Lesby, and she speculates that because the bees now have been so domesticated that you don't see this happening very much at all, but that perhaps it happens more than we would think in wild stocks of bees. But that's just plain remarkable. And so what else are these beings capable of that we don't honor them for, that we're not just in wonder about? How do you know these things and not be just your jaw hanging open all the time? I just don't get it. I think people who have no feeling for any of this are not human anymore.
Well, I mean, maybe underneath all the densifying programming, they're human, but it's buried.
Yes, yes.
And, so it still could potentially come out.
Yes.
But it has to be dug out somehow.
It's like a fire has to be lit. Something has to be lit within the heart to start a warming, because the idea that you could look out the window at a beautiful natural scene and just see it as aesthetics, you've lost something so fundamental to the human experience that I just find it tragic.
Well, and you're talking about the state of humanity as a whole, which is why the fate of, the whole biosphere, including humans, is hanging by a thread in many ways right now.
Yes.
I think it's at the bottom of it, it's because of what you just said.
Yeah.
And when you were describing the worker bees being so selfless, I would just see it a little bit different in the sense that I think they're doing exactly what they most want to do.
Mhm.
They're not sacrificing anything.
Right.
That's what they really enjoy.
Yes, they don't feel enslaved. And what some of the phrases that we use to describe happy bees is that they have heart. They have heart. And when something tragic happens in the hive, like they lose their queen or diseases rampaging through them, the bees have lost heart. And you can see it and you can hear it. Their sound changes to almost like a groan, like a groaning sound within the hive. And it's like they've lost heart. And I think that that too many of us on this planet have lost heart, and that's what's happening here. And to our students, I tell them, we're trying to hold this chalice of who the bee is so the bee can remain after all else has fallen away. We will still have the bee. We are not going to just sit by and say, nope, we're going to, keep them for honey and do this, and when it's done, it's done. No, our students are keeping bees alive just for the joy of that we're keeping them alive.
Well, I think what you're talking about is priorities, because when the priority with anything is money and power, which is not evil, because money and power are both potentially great and very beneficial. But if they become the guiding priority on top and heart, like you describe it, is at the bottom, then it's suicide for the whole planetary life system. But if you put heart as the first priority, you don't say you don't need money and power for good things. You still do. But you put heart as the priority, and the criterion by which every other activity is judged, whether you're going to do it or not, then you get more money and power and good things than you could imagine the other way. It just comes about differently.
Yes.
Right.
And I will say a story from my own experiences. When I did my first books, I was younger, 96, I was younger. And I really wanted to be famous so that I could have a voice, so that I could have the voice. And I think that wanting to be famous kept me from being famous.
Isn't that funny? It's the same thing I was trying to say just now. I mean, you can have everything that you want, but your priorities determine how you get it.
Yeah.
And if the heart is put first, and you have to relax and say, I don't care what else I sacrifice that doesn't meet the criterion of the heart.
Yeah.
And then you accept the new things that can flood in because the other ones are discarded.
Yeah.
And you get more than you were trying to get in the beginning.
Yeah.
And you don't kill yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, spiritually speaking.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. The life of purpose.
Yeah.
I can't see any other path. And I don't know. I think if I were still very, very young, I'd probably, be following little Greta all over the United States, trying to emulate her strength and her power.
I think you'd do a better job because yours comes from, spontaneous experience and insight. And she's unfortunately being groomed by people with very nefarious agendas.
Do you think so?
I really do, completely.
Okay.
And I know people would hate me for that, but I'm not saying that out of any malice toward anybody. I know the people that are behind that and giving her scripts. She's slightly autistic, and they're giving her basically not just what to say, but anger, fear, hatred of humanity, and things that don't go with real healing. And people are not catching that, and so they're picking up the anger and wanting to kill all the climate deniers and everybody.
Yes.
And it's the exact energy that will finish off all life on Earth. And it's masquerading as environmental concern.
Yeah.
So you've got these, and I don't want to monopolize our discussion here, but just I think it's really important because they're recruiting children who don't understand the depth of what you've been talking about.
Yeah.
And what they feed them is fear and real hatred of the humans that are, doing things because they don't really understand what they're doing.
Yes.
This has to come out of harmony and love of life, not condemnation. And there's a subtle difference in energy there.
Oh, I don't even know if it's subtle. I can feel it in myself. I mean, if I go that route, I can get really snarky and I can use words well.
And it's justified.
And it's like, just stop it. Stop it. Even if it's justified, it does no good. No good.
No, I mean, justification is suicide, basically.
Yeah.
Because every time there's a war, both sides are justified. And when there's a war between two individuals, it's the same way. Mm-hmm. They each know the other one is evil. Mm-hmm. And they're not watching themselves. Yeah. I think there's so many secrets that you've brought up as hints. One of them is the massive power that is in every single person, even though we're told we're nothing, 1 out of 7 billion or something. If one person cleans out themselves physically and then on higher levels, there's really almost no limit to what they can do as a chain reaction. If one of these little kids was going around demonstrating that, mm-hmm. the rulers would be trying to stop them.
Yes.
But in this case, they're giving them money. It's a clue.
Yeah. Yes. Follow the money. Yes, always.
Yeah. Not the money's bad. I'd like to see everybody really prosperous, mm-hmm. but just with the caveat, don't do it in a way that's destructive,
Yeah.
And right now, the current beekeeping industry, I mean, we don't really have time to do it in detail, but basically what they're doing, and you can correct me because and I'm just guessing, they have these boxes that are mostly wood and even plastic. They could be.
Yes. Oh gosh.
Right. Which is worse, and they have them put with these plane, these little square planes of the matrix upon which they build the comb, right? Mm-hmm. And they put them on and they hang them from the top, and then they stack them, mm-hmm. and they put a queen excluder between mm-hmm. the bottom one where the queen lives and all the others. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to trick the bees into thinking, wow, we're really going to get a big hive. We're going to lay all these eggs on these upper layers and the queen can't get in. And so they fill them with honey for the new babies that they can't get because the queen can't get there. And mm-hmm. then they sell it and feed sugar water to the bees during the winter to make sure that they still have food and take it all. It's all an industry based on putting the first priority as percentage of profit.
Extraction industries have a tendency to be cruel. Extraction industries, you got to extract from something, and either it's Mother Nature or it's a bee. When you're extracting coal, when you're extracting gas, when you're extracting anything.
Or if you start a country and extract money from the people as taxes.
Yes.
That works really well too.
The same thing, that whole extraction mentality, which is just, there's a lot of greed in it. All these things, I think, can be done gently. Yeah. And I mentioned to you before, like in my skeps, I can put a ball jar right on top. And when my hive is doing well, they can come up through the hole in the skep that I have a little cork in. I can unplug it, put a ball jar on it, put a sock over it so it stays dark because bees like the dark. And they will go up there and they will spin honeycomb and they will fill it with honey for me.
Now, if you don't put a queen excluder, is it full of baby bee eggs too?
Not usually, because the bees on something like that, I don't think the queen would be the least bit interested in wandering up there. But if she would, you just wait till they hatch out. When the babies hatch out, then they'll backfill it with some more honey.
Okay. So it still works. That's really interesting. Yeah. So I guess as a bottom line to wrap up for what people should remember from all this, there's two categories of comment you could maybe make. And one is, the kind of philosophical, ethical bottom line. And the other one is, if you're interested in having bees, what should you do? And you don't know anything.
if you're interested in having bees and you don't know anything, find a natural beekeeping group. Read certain books. There's a book out by a scientist named Jürgen Tautz, who is very respectful of bees and writes a lot about their wonder. His book is amazing. It's kind of like the textbook.
Can you spell his name?
J-U umlaut R Gen.
Okay.
Tautz.
And what's the name of the book?
The Buzz About Bees.
Okay. And that's a good introduction, right?
It's really good. It's like a textbook, but it reads like a mystery novel. It's just wonderful. And then read anything by Tom Seeley, Professor Tom Seeley.
Okay, Seeley or something like that?
Yeah. He's got several books out. He's a very respectful bee scientist who's been moving more and more over toward more natural systems of keeping.
Okay. Okay, neat. And there are these groups, natural beekeepers all over.
There are natural beekeepers here, there, and everywhere, and they all do things quite a bit differently. So, what you would look under that heading and then start seeing the kind of things that they were proposing or recommending and make a determination at that point.
Okay. And what about books and other things that you've got that people could, get more educated with too? Would they be relevant?
They're not relevant to bees, but actually Jacqueline and I, we believe we will be having a bee book published within this next year.
Okay,
it's mostly done. It's just going through all the cleanup work and stuff. And that will be about this style of beekeeping and why. And so really I think it will be, I just think it will be a real international treasure.
Yeah, it sounds like definitely. Are you on the internet, on YouTube or other places?
Yes, our organization is on a Facebook page called Preservation Beekeeping Community.
Okay.
And we also have, for the organization, preservationbeekeeping.com, which is the website. And then I have two websites. My bee website is called americanskep.wordpress.com. And that talks about my whole straw hive journey.
Okay, so preservationbeekeeping.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then tell me the other one once more. American something?
Americanskep.
Okay.
.wordpress.com.
Okay. Yeah, that's good, because I think this would be real education for people who wanted to start getting involved in it.
It'll be great. We've got the resources. We're happy to have people. I mean, and also, I'm developing a class right now for people who want to help bees, but who don't necessarily want to keep bees.
Okay.
So I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
So we talk about that too. I mean, really, there are a lot of people who don't want to have to deal with how to manage a hive or how to learn all you should learn about bees, but really want to help. And we say the best thing you could do is keep an organic yard, plant bee-friendly flowers for all the pollinators, and have a water source.
Yeah.
And talk to your neighbors. I mean, the more people, I've got a sidewalk strip. I have a sign out in front of it now that says milkweed garden. So people will know that the weeds I'm growing are for monarchs. And I have a bed full of bee-friendly flowers that has a sign on it that says flower bed. So, you can use your sidewalk strips as an educational tool, really.
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you could even educate some of the least conscious people, which are usually the ones controlling the rules for each city and town, and county?
Well,
and things like
actually, in our town, we cultivated a good relationship with our city manager, and our organization wrote the bee code for our
that?
town.
Wow. See,
So
that's a model for everybody.
yes, and we made it so that in this town you're not allowed to ship in packaged bees. You need to procure bees locally, and you can keep them. So many rules are that you have to keep them in the standard boxes with the removable frames, and our code says you keep them in anything that is beneficial and healthy for bees. So you can affect change, small change. That's my big message now. It's like, don't try to go out there and change the whole world. Change your backyard. Talk to your city leaders.
Yeah.
Things happen. Change. The best change is grassroots, and it comes from the bottom up.
Did you get included in the codes the idea that you don't have to have your front yard under 1 inch height? You know, so that you can have some flowers and things growing there.
Our the rules up here are very, very pollinator friendly. You can grow anything, so long as it's not going to poison your neighbors out there. You don't have any rules about not being able to plant vegetables in your front yard. I mean, you know, we're open like that.
So you've got a really enlightened city council in a lot of ways. It's inspiring. They should teach others.
They should. We're actually, this week we have the first bee committee meeting with the city, and there, let's see, it's going to be the city manager, somebody from city council, the city library, the city grounds maintenance and landscaper, a local permaculturist, organic farmer, 2 people from our organization, and 2 people that are very busy in the service community, like with Rotary and things like that. And we're going to get together with the goal of making Camas more bee friendly. I mean,
you know, you could use that as an angle to get them to get away from pesticides.
Yes,
you know, most cities are just flooding their area with pesticides.
Yes.
Not just Roundup, but all kinds of other stuff.
No, we want to get it all out.
Right, and you could say that's for the bees, even though it's also for the humans.
Yes.
And you could maybe, I don't know if this is possible, but start introducing them to the idea of needing to get fiber optic cable and Wi-Fi, non-Wi-Fi sources of all the wiring for the computers and the, you know, getting rid of EMF pollution, because that is really
open to that. They're remarkable. Basically, when we came to them, we said, everything we're going to tell you that's good for bees is also really good for the citizens of town.
Yeah.
So you know, if we promote this from this angle, it serves everybody. And they just got on board. They said, we don't know anything about bees, but this is really cool. So they just listened. They read all the literature we handed them. They took it seriously.
I would love to see what happens with that in the future, because they could become like a model for other city councils and county boards of supervisors, and
that's our hope.
Maybe even state governments. I mean, they're harder to reach, but it's not impossible.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, sounds exciting.
It is.
Okay. Well, we covered enough for people to digest for a while, and hopefully you'll be back in the future. That was fun. So hold on, we'll say goodbye in the break here.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. That was Susan Knilans, and I'm looking at the microscopic notes that I wrote down about 2 sites that she told us that would be good to check out, and I'm going to go to them too, in case they're different than what I saw already. One is preservationbeekeeping.com, preservationbeekeeping.com. The other one is American Skep, and I didn't ask her, but I assume it's SKEP. .wordpress.com, and also the books that she mentioned, her own books for sure, which are like background information on and experience of what she got from dealing with animals as teachers and healers, and that's one book, and then Animals as Guides for the Soul, and the third one is Heart in the Wild, and the other books that she mentioned as being really worthwhile that I'm going to try to look at. One of them is Jürgen Tautz, the Buzz About Bees, and she said his name is spelled Jurgen, last name Tautz, the Buzz About Bees, and the other one was Professor Tom Seeley, which I think is probably Seeley, any of his books. So that was really intense for me. There was so much that she was sharing with us, I think, maybe more than was apparent on the surface. This is a person that is really perceptive about nature, and we've kind of degenerated as a culture, and I mean a worldwide culture, into thinking, with this mistaken idea about modern science. Science used to be what Susan was talking about. It's observing nature, observing yourself, external and internal, with no preconceptions, and just noticing patterns, drawing conclusions from what you see and say, oh, well, I wonder if this means this, and setting up a little test that you can do to check if your hypothesis of what might be going on is true. It's not like reading some approved journal article and repeating it in different words or adding a couple of thoughts to it. It's like your own direct exploration. Kind of something that's essential to making life really dimensional and interesting. And she's one of these people like Jacqueline that's doing that every day and coming into harmony with nature. And I think the apparent conflict that was really interesting that she brought up is between reducing everything, like I learned about when I went to business school, into what is the percentage profit, how to make it more efficient. For example, making everything just-in-time delivery. They think that's really advanced, and it means that in 3 days there's nothing in the stores, but it's really efficient. I mean, kind of out of touch, not just with common sense, but with deeper perception too. And it's turned the relationship between humans and bees into how can we turn these into little robotic machines and just take everything we can for them as long as they're still alive, and look always for ways to maximize that further. That little thing is missing, that middle part about don't do anything unless it is in harmony with higher principles and the direct perception that you're supposed to have from the heart center, not just from cold intellect. And the people who think that they're really advanced by deleting that and just staying in that potentially frozen, vicious approach that now is threatening to destroy all life on the planet by design, not by mistake. What they miss is that there's nothing wrong with money and prosperity and abundance and power for good things and opening up our real potential, which is more power than our rulers can imagine right now because they don't see us manifesting it, but we could. And nothing wrong with any of that stuff, including money, but just have that little caveat after we've made all these mistakes and worked for or started things that ended up damaging the environment or people. That's not really necessary to have overwhelming prosperity. You don't have to have like austerity on one side and making money by destruction on the other side. There's something else, and it's like that sense of direct perception and harmony with the energies and consciousness that are flowing in nature, and then thinking, all right, how can we be in harmony with that and expand the benefits to ourselves and other life forms? And in the process, there's these little side effects like you love what you're doing, almost unknown to people in most jobs these days. And not only do you love what you're doing, but you're getting all the prosperity you can imagine and more. You don't give it up by making that absolute requirement that it has to be in line with what is coming from heart or from spirit or from harmony and deeper perception. And that's the main value. I think the specifics that she talked about, animals and bees and the relationship with humans, and the fact that even insects have this massive consciousness. They're not these little, what we were taught is that animals, and especially like these lowly insects, they don't have any idea. They're not aware of anything. They have nothing like our, super developed emotional state or massively impressive intellect or anything like that. They just fly around and then they die, and they're basically nothing. that's not entirely accurate, to put it mildly. There's such deep perception that's not clouded in insects like bees and basically all the others, probably even on the microbe scale, that if humans were opened up to perceive the depth of the life around them, they just, like Susan was saying during our discussion, just stand there amazed with your mouth open, not knowing what to say, because you realize we are just trying to learn from nature, not dominate and destroy it like a lot of us are trying to do. So anyway, I thought it was a great discussion, and I was telling Doug that I feel really honored and privileged that we get to sit here and in the front row of a discussion with people like Susan and so many others that have come on our show from day one, and share this with you guys so that hopefully this adds to the education of all of us. A couple of wrap-up things. When you get a chance, and hopefully right away before you forget, go to lostartsradio.com and get on our mailing list, because even though really the depth of what Susan has said is a threat to the current degenerate power structure and unconsciousness of humanity, it probably won't be seen that way, so it's not likely, I don't think, to be censored. But a lot of the things we talk about are more on the edge, maybe seen as threats to those in power. So before we get cut off, if you can, get on our mailing list, lostartsradio.com. We're not using it, but if we get separated from you by being banned, then we can get information and maybe videos and things like that to you if you want it. So it's just name and email address, and then when and if we have to use it, it'll be there before it's too late for that. Also, another alternate site in case you're watching this particular show and others on one of the major platforms that we're on, shadow banned but still on. Go to brighteon.com, brighteon.com /channel/Lost Arts Radio, and get in the habit of watching there as much as you can, because that's a site that Mike started, a platform that Mike started at great expense to himself, and maybe it's getting near break even now, but it needs to grow, and it's about to have live stream capability added. It's a great platform to tell everybody about, and if you just use it, then the occasional response to the advertising that's run starts to fund them more, so they just need more users. Brighteon.com, and it's got a lot of interesting stuff to watch there now. Plus, you can get your own channel there if you like to post things. Good place to be, and it won't be censored for any of the normal ridiculous reasons that things are censored. Beyond that, we have a new page on subscribestar.com if you'd like to help us increase our chances of staying in operation, being able to share all this and spend all of our time, doing this kind of work, mostly without any kind of compensation. And if you have means, go to subscribestar.com and donate somewhere between $1 and $1 trillion a month or something. If we get anybody that has a lot of money and likes what we're doing, we'll build our school without having to wait 100 years to do that. And that would be great. I would love to be doing that and broadcasting from the school. It's an expensive project and we don't have any money. So if you'd like to help us either stay in operation and survive, which we're not up to quite yet, or on a bigger scale, expand the work that we're doing, go to subscribestar.com/LostArtsRadio and consider helping us that way. And there are little levels of doing that, some of which include memberships to Planetary Healing Club, private sessions with me, which I do a few of still. And Planetary Healing Club, I don't want to forget about. That's where we meet on a secure platform, at least more secure than the one you're probably listening on. And it's interactive and live once a week, and we can talk about anything, including all the research, experimental research work that I did into areas of health and consciousness that are practical, that you can use. And I can't talk about those freely on public platforms because they're not allowed, but they are there because it's private members only. You can access it through planetaryhealingclub.com. And if you're not sure about whether it's worth it, and I'm not saying it is for everybody, There are small dues that help us keep operating that are great if you feel like it's worth it for you. But if you're not sure, just ask a question if you want to, and I'll respond. It's richard@lostartsradio.com. I'll tell you more about what it's about or whatever you want to know. Or if you have any suggested guests or any, comments about the shows or anything, send them in by email if you want to, richard@lostartsradio.com. I'm really glad to see feedback like that. And in the club, it's all lifetime interactive, so you might like that. And any kind of questions are welcome. planetaryhealingclub.com. In the meantime, we'll put out what we can publicly and extra videos during the week when time allows. And we try to stay in touch with you as much as we can. Next Sunday, we'll have another great guest show that you'll probably enjoy. And I appreciate your spending the time with us. I know your time is limited and valuable, so thank you. And thanks for making our shows possible. We'll talk to you soon.